It's Wednesday, September 18th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast. It is a hell of a day to talk ball. I am loving the NFL season so far. I am having an absolute blast, and I'm absolutely excited to have with me today, of course, as always, on Data Dump Wednesday, it's Sal Vetri. Sal, what's going on, buddy?
You know, not much. I'm happy to be here with you because this is like the time of the week, maybe for the listeners too, that I start to turn from the previous week to the next week. And I kind of need that. I've been tilting off of some of my fantasy performances last week. The biggest one, you try and go to brunch, have some fun, and you get a late scratch inactive from Evan Ingram that ends up losing your week, a 3-point loss. So I'm trying to get to the next week here. Here's my my little cope in this podcast episode to start with you.
I mean, dude, I feel like everybody wants to turn the page from week 2, especially with all of the injuries. Evan Ingram is like the one I kind of forget about, especially because it happened so late.
I can't forget
Actually, I had to talk. Sal will never forget it. I have one team. I have one team that just is completely obliterated at this point. It's like we're on to next year with a couple of these teams, and it just is what it is. So, reminder: this is the pod where we really push away from week 2 and we pivot onto week 3. So, with that, let's get into the post week 2 data dump.
Yes, science.
My calculations are correct. You're going to see some serious.
If you're new to the show, what we do here, by the way, welcome. Thank you. Appreciate you. You are now a part of our inner circle if you're new to the show. What we do here on Data Dump Wednesday is I have 5 stats that I think you need to know coming out of each week. Sal has 5 stats that you need to know coming out of each week. And then also, Sal, we finish the show with your moves to make, and we've got some bangers here at the end of the show that I'm excited to dive into. But let's start off with the first data dump segment here. And this is for my first 2. I think my first 3, I really tried to focus on some offenses that I think are still maybe a little bit misunderstood or I'm trying to figure out. So with my first one, I wanted to throw out this Geno Smith stat. Geno Smith has the second lowest off-target throw rate in the NFL right now. He has and this is where I think this is interesting if we're juxtaposing this from last year's offense to this year's Seahawks offense, Sal, because I talked about this a lot on the recap show with Andy, watching this offense in Seattle this year, and then especially looking at Shane Waldron's offense in Chicago right now. I just think there are some real stark differences that I feel pretty good about what we're getting out of Seattle right now. So far, deep throw rate, according to Pro Football Focus, ranks 21st among quarterbacks this year, does Geno Smith. Last year, it was 12th in 2023. He's also top 6 is Geno Smith in passes over the middle of the field with a plus 13% completion rate over expected. Sal, I know it's sort of, I feel like the Seahawks offense is it's flying a little bit under the radar in fantasy right now. It's not one of the most talked about stories. They haven't played in like marquee games. They've played the Broncos. They've played the Patriots, 2 teams that most people don't expect to be very good this year. And I think the Patriots are better than expected. I think these are 2 pretty quality secondaries. That's also kind of contributing, I think, to this passing game flying under the radar. So I think there's a lot of potential buys in Seattle right now. I think Geno Smith is rising up my quarterback rankings. We finally got the game we wanted out of Jackson Smith and Jigba. And I've really liked the usage for DK Metcalf through 2 weeks. So I do kind of feel like this Seahawks offense flying a little bit under the radar, and we do have some potential, I think, really good fantasy starters here rest of the season.
Yeah, I think that Geno was probably the best quarterback I watched. Maybe Kyler Murray would have an argument for that in week 2.
Ooh.
Everything was just, I would say, comfortable for him. He looked confident as well. And we saw this during stretches last year. It felt like almost every single Seahawks game, there'd be 2 to 3 great drives. Geno looked like he did in his comeback player of the year season. And then the pressure would break down or he would have a pick and the entire rest of the half would just kind of be thrown away. We didn't see that in week 2. We just saw the entire game of good play out of him. And I do think a big piece of that is the play caller and the scheme that you're mentioning. There was just some more layups, especially on like third downs for him. You see Jackson Smith, the Jigba running over the middle of the field. DK Metcalf, like you were saying, the utilization, not just deep, but also over the middle of the field, having just more easy buckets for Geno Smith in this offense, because we know what he can do with his arm when he has the time to throw. And that's kind of the crazy thing here is like the personnel hasn't changed. The offensive line isn't playing like insanely better than it was last year when it wasn't great either. Like this offensive line, I still think is a little bit of a problem, but they're kind of scheming it out a little bit. And I think Ryan Grubb, the play caller, has a lot to do with that. Geno is playing confident. And yeah, I think some of these guys that might be considered buy highs now, your DK Metcalf, your Jackson Smith, and the Jigbas, if you drafted him, you're probably not going to be trading him at all at this point, but maybe try and send some feelers out there. We'll talk about guys you can try and trade for later as well.
Yeah, for sure, man. I think you said that so perfectly. When I watched this team against the Patriots on Sunday, I did just feel like, wow, Geno has some real layups here and some real answers against pressure and just answers over the middle of the field. I think when you watched this Seahawks offense last year, it was very ISO routes, guys just kind of going out and nothing really kind of built off each other. Nothing really worked together. I didn't see a lot of like, okay, we're having DK run this big over and then JSN's kind of getting open on a quick out. We didn't see any of that stuff last year. That's a lot of what I saw against the Patriots. And the passes over the middle of the field, I think are critical here because, DK really has never been used that way. I actually think it's pretty exciting to see him run some routes over the middle of the field because he's a big body. Like, why not get him rolling down the field on some of these over routes? Tyler Lockett's never really been that guy. He's more of like a pure vertical receiver, but that is the game of Jackson Smith and Jigba. So I still have obviously he had a boatload of targets in week 2. People were panicking after week 1. I think you feel really good about JSN if he's your wide receiver 3 rest of season. Just want to throw out the matchups coming forward for JSN too. They get Miami this week, do the Seattle Seahawks. That's probably a game where Jalen Ramsey is going to be covering on DK Metcalf a lot, and DK is good enough to win that matchup, no question, but should be some softer coverage going JSN's way. You'd imagine with the Dolphins likely starting Skylar freaking Thompson, they're probably going to be favored. They're probably going to score a lot of points in that game. The Lions, I know you're going to talk about that later with one of your stats. They've been getting smashed in the slot. And then the Giants in week 5, another very vulnerable secondary. So I think JSN has a lot of really good matchups here coming up. And again, there was panic after week 1, but with the way Geno's playing, with the way this offense looks and his role in this offense, I really do think we could get a top 30 season bare minimum for a guy like JSN.
Yeah, I think so too. I think trending all the way up at this point. And we saw in week 1, they could do it with the run game when they think the matchup is there. You're facing a Patrick Surtain in Denver on the outside, kind of took away DK Metcalf in that game. Week 2, they don't have a Kenneth Walker, but they just do it through the passing game. So it's nice to see the versatility in this offense. And moving forward, I think that's going to be beneficial to adapt to whatever the matchup is.
Yeah, it would be. I'm a little disappointed about Zach Charbonnet after week 2. I do think Kenneth Walker is just a better back than him. So we'll see what happens when he gets back out there. That's kind of the one note I have about the Seahawks offense. You mentioned Kyler Murray as the other great performance in week 2. And I love, I don't know if you saw this on Twitter, that Kyler, or our own Nate Tice, posted like a screenshot of Kyler throwing the touchdown to Elijah Higgins and like had turned away, pointing and celebrating it before Higgins had even caught the pass. And Kyler responded to it that was pretty sick. He knew what he was doing. So Kyler's feeling himself right now. The offense looked great in week 2. I think the biggest difference here, Sal, because I've been thinking about this a lot, of what was different with the offense in week 1 versus week 2. One difference before I get to the stat here is just, I felt like in week 1, I kept saying it was very Dortchy. It was very kind of sideline passes, stuff like that. In week 2, it felt like the offense that I thought in Arizona. They've got big dudes who can play physical, and Kyler Murray at quarterback. But they got big dudes in Marvin Harrison, Michael Wilson, Trey McBride, and those guys can rip you down the field. And that is exactly what the stats show too. So Kyler Murray deep passing per PFF. Week 1, he threw just 9.7% of his attempts were deep passes. 0 of 3 on those deep passes. In week 2, he threw deep on 23.8% of his throws. He completed all 5 for 156 yards and 3 touchdowns. We know Marvin Harrison went off. Trey McBride had a nice game. So I ask you, Sal Vetri, what's real? What's the mirage between two pretty different offenses we saw in week 1 and week 2?
Yeah, I mean, like many things, it's probably somewhere in the middle, but I would say this is probably closer to real. Now, I don't think you're going to generate, what was it, 6 or 7 explosive plays in the passing game every single week, but just the fact that, one, they actually started to take those shots more. They kind of put that into the game plan using Marvin Harrison. Probably a good idea downfield. So, yeah, I think that this is probably closer to real. And this is what we thought in the offseason. Like, they kind of just needed that one guy, that one alpha receiver. They go out, get Marvin Harrison Jr., and that's going to help the rest of the offense. Like Michael Wilson having to be your number one option, not just for him as a rookie last year during times, but just defenses knowing that and making it easier for them to take him out as a third-round rookie. Now he's the second option, maybe even third option in the passing attack on some plays. That's going to open some things up now for him downfield. You see a lot more guys getting involved. And yeah, I think that this, especially when we factor in Kyler's ability to extend plays, create big plays, not only with his leg, but when you get out of the pocket, give your receivers more time to improvise. I think this is probably going to be not the norm, these 6 20-plus yard completions I think that he had, but just big plays are going to be more present in the passing attack moving forward. And I think it's an exciting offense entering year 2 with Drew Petzing.
Yeah, it does feel like wheels up. I don't want to get too over my skis here, but because the Rams defense is not good. They're going to do this or teams are going to do this to the Rams a lot this year. There's no question about that. But just the way it felt, like I said, in week 2, felt very, I don't want to say completely, defense agnostic or like opponent agnostic, but some of the plays that were made did feel really repeatable, right? Kyler Murray escaping from pressure, looking for Marvin Harrison downfield. Marvin Harrison getting free on a scramble drill when Kyler Murray is under pressure. That feels like something they can repeat going forward, and ways that the one of the earlier Marvin Harrison catches, not one of the touchdowns, but when he just goes to that guy and throws it to him on the sideline, that's very, I think, repeatable stuff. And again, some of the 2 tight end usage, people aren't going to start Elijah Higgins on their fantasy team, or, Tip Ryman's never going to be a fantasy factor. But the fact that these guys are out there playing legit reps, Ryman runs 7 routes, Higgins runs 5 routes. He obviously catches the touchdown on his lone target of the day. Those things are just going to be plays that are inherently good in the offense. So yeah, I'm with you. Truth is somewhere in the middle. We've got, it's a pretty nice couple of games here. I do think the Lions defense is on the up and up, but that's a high scoring game in week 3. Week 4, the Cardinals get the Commanders at home. I mean, my God, if Marvin Harrison Jr. did that to the Rams in week 2, what's he going to do to the Commanders in week 4? While we're just talking about the Cardinals, I do kind of want to play a little bit of my favorite game, this guy or that guy, when we're talking fantasy here on the show. I want to just ask you about Kyler Murray. I know people are excited about Anthony Richardson prior to the season, but is it crazy to say that I just think Kyler Murray is a better fantasy quarterback than Anthony Richardson? And honestly, as much as I love CJ Stroud, I think he's probably a better fantasy quarterback than CJ Stroud at this point.
No, I don't think that's crazy. I had him ranked ahead of both guys entering the season. I think he ended up being like a 6th round pick. He was a 7th round pick early in the summer, but for most people's drafts in August, he was a 6th round pick. You had Richardson and Stroud usually going late 4th, early 5th. Richardson dropped closer to the end of August in the season, but I'd just rather have him. They said everything we wanted to see was just get the alpha receiver. We got that. He's coming into year 2 in an offense, and he's also healthier. Like, that's the big thing. The scrambling that we're talking about, creating those plays, his scramble rate doubled in week 2. I think that's something that can stay consistent as long as he's healthy, because he wasn't healthy coming off of a torn ACL last year. He hasn't been healthy for really the chunk of the last 3 seasons. So if he stays healthy this year, I don't see why he can't finish as a top 5 and maybe even a league-winning style quarterback.
Absolutely. And I think James Conner's clearly top 20, maybe top 15 type back at the position. And I'll ask you just about Marvin Harrison before we move on. After what we saw in week 1 and then what we saw in week 2, are we just back to Marvin Harrison is probably a wide receiver 1 at this point, especially because there's been quarterback injuries to other players, injuries to other guys there. I had him in kind of that wide receiver 10 spot prior to the season. I'm not sure where you were on it, but that's kind of where I have him from a rest of season perspective too.
Yeah, pretty similar. Like after week 1, a lot didn't change. Like in terms of rest of season rankings, maybe a slight drop down by a couple of spots compared to some other guys who had big week 1s or really strong usage. So yeah, I think right around, depending on the week, top 15 guy, once buys start to come in, probably a top 10 to top 12 receiver week in and week out.
All right, let's go into another offense that I can't quite wrap my head around at this point, and that's the Tennessee Titans offense. And I'll do this by talking about Calvin Ridley here. Calvin Ridley, leads all pass catchers with a 60% share of his team's air yards. He leads the Titans with a 21.7% target share. The Titans were definitely right. They let us know they were going to throw to the backs in the preseason. That's what they've been doing. They have 2 running backs ranked inside the top 4 in terms of team target share right now. 3 of Calvin Ridley's week 2 receptions came against Sauce Gardner for 71 yards and a touchdown. He probably had another throw that could have been a big gain that went through his hands. That's kind of the Calvin Ridley coaster at this point. He's going to make some great plays. He's going to leave some plays on the field. That was who he was in Jacksonville last year. It's certainly been the way it's been through 2 weeks here in Tennessee. But I don't know, Sal. This is another offense that I think we're all hyper-focused on Will Levis and the litany of mistakes he makes. His head coach is certainly focused on that. It's been grinding my gears a little bit, Sal, that everybody now is saying, oh, Will Levis is he's just like Jameis Winston. Yo, I've been saying that from the second I saw Will Levis play last year. So I want credit for being first on that for sure, for nothing but petty reasons. But I think we're focused on the negative plays of Will Levis, and I get it. It's very memeable. It's very frustrating if you're a Titans fan. But I do think there's some legit fantasy value here in this offense. Am I crazy?
Maybe. You might be crazy. But here's before we get into
Fair
that. So you're telling me whenever somebody says Jameis Winston on the broadcast, you're the Leo meme pointing to the screen saying, that's mine. Yeah.
That's me. Yes.
I said that.
On Twitter, on podcasts. I mean, I'm pointing to my phone, right? Like with the Leo meme. Like that was me.
No, you're fair. And here's the thing. It all starts. You have to start with Will Levis, like in terms of the Calvin Ridley, because the rest of these pass catchers, like, yeah, Tyler Boyd, if you're in like a 20-person league, I thought was interesting, or a 20-team league, I thought was interesting. But it's tough when Hopkins is still injured. What is Treylon Burks? What is Nick Westbrook at this point? So yeah, Ridley's going to be the guy who stands out in that passing attack. It doesn't shock me that he's leading the team in target share. The overall air yards is interesting, especially for the type of role that we saw him have last year with Jacksonville. He had a similar role in terms of downfield usage, and it didn't pan out. But now he has a quarterback who wants to throw that, and he's kind of the only option. But I am a little bit concerned because right now, Ridley, small sample, 2 games. What is it, like 13, 14 targets? More than half of them are not catchable at this point. So is he just going to be like this boom bust type receiver? If you're going to have that, you might as well get the downfield targets instead of like 6 targets that are just 8 yards downfield. So that's part of it. Like how consistent or real are these air yards and downfield usage if it's coming from Will Levis? And the other part is like, what is Will Levis going to be? It's just a 2-game sample, and it's been all over the place. There's been some bright spots. There's been some crazy spots. Part of it's on him, but also part of it is like this offensive line was a concern coming into the year. He leads all quarterbacks in terms of NFL Pro. Pressure rate, 53% of his dropbacks under pressure. Now, part of that's him, but that is 9% higher than any other quarterback right now. Like, I don't think that's sustainable. I think the offensive line, it's early. You have a rookie on that offensive line, J.C. Latham. It should start to get a little bit more cohesive and come together. But at this point, that really scares me. Like, I came into this week wanting to sell Calvin Ridley on the one team that I have him on, just because of some of these concerns.
It's worth pointing out, too, they've had 2 pretty tough defensive matchups, especially from a pass rush perspective. Chicago and the Jets, at least on the front line. You know, the Jets have a lot of good players on the interior. The Bears obviously have Montez Sweat. These are 2 of the better defenses from last year, that's for sure. So that could be an issue. It's a young offensive line, too. Peter Skoronski was a first-round pick last year. J.C. Latham, first-round pick this year. Like this. That's part of where if I'm leaning optimistic, the story you have to tell yourself is this is a young quarterback, a first-time head coach, a young offensive line. Maybe they'll get better throughout the course of the season. And this is a veteran receiver who people are obviously have a lot of feelings about Calvin Ridley after last year when he got so much hype, but he's still a good NFL receiver. I think capable of being a team's number 1, probably more volatile than you want from a number 1, but somebody that can be this team's number 1. And I just have no idea when DeAndre Hopkins is going to be healthy. He's playing through a torn MCL. Like they do have an early bye, which is nice. They have a week 5 bye. So there's a chance that we could see week 6 against a bad Colts defense, like maybe DeAndre Hopkins is back out and fully operational at that point. I think that's possible. But at the same time, I also wouldn't be shocked, Sal, if just because the rapport is growing and is clearly there with Calvin Ridley, that he's just the team's top target going forward. And once we get some better matchups and maybe this offensive line kind of coalesces a little bit, I don't know, maybe Will Levis calms down a touch here. And that could be good news for Calvin Ridley. I guess my only point here is just when I look at people's rankings for fantasy and stuff like that, Calvin Ridley is still a guy that generally is ranked outside the top I don't know, like 32 receivers, which maybe I can see, but is his outlook from a week to week basis based on who he is as a player and the usage he's getting in this offense right now? Is it really that different from guys like George Pickens or I don't know, like a Tank Dell who's been a volatile guy so far? And I generally still feel like Ridley is ranked lower industry wide than those players.
Yeah, I think in terms of George Pickens, I would rather have Ridley. Like if you're saying to start for week 3, I would rather have Calvin Ridley at this point. And I think part of that is just I feel more comfortable with the offense of Tennessee throwing 30 plus times a game. Like right now, they're only averaging 30 passing plays a game. And I feel like that's going to go up a little bit. Like the entire league is down in terms of passing right now, the way that defenses are playing. But you're going to have these weeks where a Tennessee team that their defense is probably a lot better than people expected coming into the year. But there's going to be weeks where they fall behind by 7 to 10 to 14 points, and Will Levis is going to have to throw 35 to 40 times. And when a guy's seeing a 25 to 30% target share like Calvin Ridley, those are the weeks that you're really going to see some spike 20-plus point performances. And I feel more comfortable with that happening with Tennessee than teams like the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, I don't know that we could call him like a true. He might be like another buy high just because he's wide receiver 15. Like bottom line stats look pretty good for him, especially because he scored a damn rushing touchdown. I don't know how many times that's going to happen this year, but somebody that I think could get interesting when they eventually do run into some more softer defenses, which might not be for a while, but that week 6 Colts matchup is definitely one that I have my eye on. Down the stretch, this is so far away, but there's some better matchups in the back half of the year for the Tennessee Titans. So maybe just an offense to pay attention to as we go throughout the course of the year. And an offense that people are definitely paying attention to, Sal, is the Lions passing game. So I'm going to juxtapose their first read target share according to fantasy points data from this year to last year. So 2024, first read target share for the Lions offense so far this year. Jameson Williams leads the team, 34.5%. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 31%. Jahmyr Gibbs, 10.3%. Sam Laporta, 8.6% for Laporta. You go back to last year, 2023, the list goes Amon-Ra St. Brown, 34.9%. Sam Laporta, 19.9%. Jameson Williams, 11.5% when he was playing. Josh Reynolds, 11.5%. And Jahmyr Gibbs, identical first read target share, 10.3%. So I think it's fair to say so far, Sal, that the addition of Jameson Williams and the verticality that his role has presented, it looks like Sam Laporta is clearly the biggest loser here in this development.
Yeah, I mean, only so many targets can go around. And last year when it was Josh Reynolds, and, he was a guy maybe getting some third down targets, maybe 3 to 5 targets in a game, it's one thing. But now when it's Jameson Williams coming out here, and as you showed from fantasy points, leading the team in first read target shares, having obviously the downfield role. I think he's top 10 in air yards right now. But he's also somebody that, especially in week 1 against the Rams, was being schemed up over the middle of the field. And when your defense is in zone defenses at times, you're facing linebackers in that area in terms of yards after the catch. And that's just a mismatch. And we saw that. So those are the types of spots where maybe Sam Laporta was winning in the past. And again, it's just 2 games. But Jameson Williams is winning there this year. And that's not what Josh Reynolds was doing for this team last season. So I would say it is concerning for Laporta. Like if you were spending a 3rd, even a 4th round pick on him, I don't think that's going to get paid off barring some sort of injury. And it seems like Amon-Ra St. Brown is fine right now. But in terms of Jameson Williams, yeah, I mean, it seems like it's the JMO season. Over about 14 yards or average depth of target of 14 right now. 3 end zone targets so far, 4 targets off play action. Like this is all great usage.
All right, so let's talk about both of those players there and just how it kind of affects the construction of the offense right now, because I do wonder if they've gotten a little bit too JMO centric. It's sometimes when I watch this team, I think Goff is taking more risks, which is good and obviously can pay you back in some big plays. And I'm not even saying like, oh, his 2 interceptions are because Jameson Williams is on the field or anything like that. But I feel like Goff has gotten a little bit away from the layups of this offense, which St. Brown obviously gets his first read target share back up close to where it was last year. A boatload of targets in week 2. I don't think we're concerned about that. But some of those easy buttons to Laporta, I feel like if we take those, we're getting back on schedule from a Lions offensive perspective. And the Jameson part of this is going to be riskier. It's going to be more downfield routes, and I do wonder if they've gotten away from sort of the bread and butter of what's made the Lions such an offensive machine in the first 2, for at least the last 2 years here. I don't know. Am I galaxy braining this, or do we think that do you think we could see an adjustment here in the next couple weeks? Like, hey, Ben Johnson, Jared Goff get together, watch the film. They're like, okay, there's all these layups to Laporta. Like, yes, we want to hit big plays to Jameson Williams. He's clearly a good player. He's clearly valuable to the offense. But let's maybe get back to sort of the bread and butter of what's made our offense good the last 2 years.
Yeah, I think it's going to happen. I think it's just kind of like a balancing act. He's still running 81% of the routes this year, which is great, which is strong. Could even get a little bit higher, but that's solid for Sam Laporta. And you might be getting like just like the Diet Coke version of the San Francisco 49ers offense here, where you have a pass-catching running back involved, a couple of receivers that you know are going to be involved in creative ways, and then the tight end like George Kittle, he's going to have those blow-up weeks. He's going to be great, but is it consistent every single week? Maybe that's happening with Laporta through 2 weeks. It seems like that right now. Only 7 targets. I don't think that low of volume is going to hold the rest of the season. I don't think the Lions, who got to the red zone 7 times, are only going to convert one of those times moving forward in most weeks. Like, there's going to be touchdowns. Those alone can help Laporta. So, yeah, I would say for a team that's so far this season been in every single one of the highest projected games, and that's including week 3, they're projected for the highest total. Yeah, I think it'll be fine. It's just not going to pay off the 3rd round price. Like, I think you could still start him. There's no worries that he's going to have to hit your bench anytime soon, like maybe a guy like Dalton Kincaid from the Bills. But yeah, it's just not going to pay off 3rd round price.
And well, number one, yeah, I like that. And I think that the George Kittle comparison is actually really good. That makes a lot of sense in terms of what you can expect from Laporta. And, I think that's definitely going forward. I think that's probably a good way to view him as just a volatile guy. So Jameson Williams, though, is he somebody that you're just saying this is an every week, set it and forget it start at this point?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like 12-team leagues for sure. Definitely a wide receiver or flex at the bare minimum at this point. We saw it in week 1, and it looked real. Like the usage, he was schemed into the offense, all the hype from the offseason. You didn't believe it in week 1, fine. Now you saw it in week 2. I don't even think we have to see it in week 3 to actually believe it again if he has a bad game, but I think we're probably going to, just based on the matchup that he's going to have in that game environment. So yeah, he's a set it and forget it right now for me.
Yeah, he's in this bucket of receivers, honestly, that we talked about with Calvin Ridley, I think with George Pickens and Tank Dell, who I know we're going to talk about later. These are all guys that you've got to accept some low weeks from them. Like, there's going to be probably like a 2-catch game from Jameson Williams, especially if they get back to spamming Sam Laporta. But that Lions analogy is a really good one. The 49ers analogy is a really good one, that these are the type of players you just start every week and accept the volatility going forward. All right, my final stat this week is about a extremely good player. I'm just curious how you're viewing him rest of season. Devon Achan's 0.194 first downs per route run per fantasy points data ranks 2nd among all players with 30-plus routes this year. He trails only Chris Godwin, and he's right ahead of Nico Collins and Rashee Rice. His 18.4 target share is the 4th highest among all running backs. Devon Achane has been one of the best pass catchers in the league this year, at least one of the most efficient pass catchers in the league this year from a per route basis, which is pretty exciting. And honestly, I think was the key, said this all offseason, was the key to him paying off his high ADP this year. So, Sal, from a rest of season perspective, we've kind of got 2 things we need to juggle here. One, Achane and just what's his role going to be when Raheem Mostert's back there? That stuff I'm not as concerned about, but we know that we're going to probably not have Tua for an extended stretch here. We'll see how long that is. It's not even really, I think, worth speculating about. And then 3, this incredible pass catching role relative to the rest of the field of running backs. I feel like Achane, after those top 3 of Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley, I feel like Devon Achane is probably the 4th best running back in fantasy right now. Yes or no?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say he has the upside to still be, even with Skylar Thompson as the quarterback for the foreseeable future, the running back number 1 overall at the end of the year. I mean, this guy, like, I don't want to brag, but I play flag football here and there, and I'm not the best guy on my team, but you know who the best guy on the field is at all points. You're like, I don't know how that guy moves like that. That's Devon Achane. Like, this is just a guy that no matter how they get the ball in his hands, receiving, running, end arounds, whatever it is, they just want to get that ball in his hands 10 to 15 plus times a game, and it makes sense. He just creates explosive plays left and right. And he's the only guy on the Dolphins that once Tua went down and you actually digested a little bit, what's the offense going to look like for fantasy under Skylar Thompson? He's the only guy that I'm not really concerned about compared to the wide receivers. Skylar Thompson, this is a guy who has had 3 starts with the Dolphins, including the postseason. He's targeted his running backs 32% of the time, 38% of the time, and 22% of the time in those games. And those are with running backs like Salvin Ahmed, Jeff Wilson, nowhere near the type of dynamic pass catcher like we've seen so far from Achane. So, yeah, I'm not really concerned right now. He leads all running backs with 14 catches. He's top 5 in efficiency, EPA, yards per out run, whatever you want to see as a receiver. And then obviously you get the run game, whatever he's going to do as a runner, which just seems like a bonus at this point. So, yeah, I'm still all in on Achane. I'm not trying to move him or anything like that.
Yeah, that's good advice because I feel like some people might be potentially trying to say, "Oh, is he a guy to sell on because of the quarterback change and everything there? Just maybe the offensive environment taking a step back, which it's certainly going to take a step back. There's no question about that." They get the Seahawks in week 3. I've been pretty impressed with the Seahawks defense so far. I think Mike McDonald's made some good in-game adjustments, especially like last game out when Hunter Henry is just thumping them over and over again early in the game, and then they kind of blanked him later. Watching it back, I feel like they did some good adjustments there with like Julian Love getting some coverage there on Hunter Henry. That was nice to see. I've just generally been impressed with Mike McDonald so far. That's going to be a tough defensive matchup for old Skylar Thompson. So I feel like it's going to be, feeling pressure. There's Achane. There's Achane. And I feel like we're going to get a lot of that here in week number 3. While we're talking Dolphins, what's your advice to people that have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle?
Yeah, Tyreek Hill is just kind of a hold on to it. I mean, if you could trade him for like a Jamar Chase right now, I would do that. I don't know if that owner would really want to do that 1-for-1 flop of an elite wide receiver that's struggling or maybe in a weird spot. But he's still top 15 rest of season player for me. Jalen Waddle is a little bit more of a concern, I would say. Skylar Thompson has not really shown in his very limited sample to be able to support multiple pass catchers. Like we mentioned, he's targeting his running backs a third of the time, which isn't great for the wide receiver target share. When you have a guy like Tyreek who's going to command, and he has commanded from Skylar Thompson around the 30% target share as well. So Waddle at this point, I mean, if you're in like 12-team leagues, you're almost just kind of forced to start him. Around a 10 fantasy point day is probably what you're just hoping for at this point, which isn't great depending on what you have on your bench. But yeah, he's somebody that you could probably bench moving forward, but gonna be floating in that like wide receiver 24 to 28 range for me heading into week 3, most likely.
Bummer. It is a bummer, but yeah, honestly, I might even rather just have like Nico Collins or AJ Brown or Amon-Ra St. Brown ahead of Tyreek Hill going forward. I don't know if you could do that 1-for-1 swap at this point, but I would rather even AJ Brown, who's dealing with an injury right now. Like when he gets back, I would almost just rather have him than Tyreek Hill. So yeah, 1-to-1 trades in same position trades are always tough. And it's like, do you really even get any better? You're kind of just trying to get one over on somebody. But I would. There's a lot of receivers I'd rather have than Tyreek Hill at this point.
Yeah, I agree. And I think if you can make it happen just based off of Tyreek's name value, and he has had good performances to start the year, Rashee Rice, Nico Collins are guys I would definitely go for.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Sal's got a great bunch of stats on a wide receiver I might rather have than Jalen Waddle rest of season right after this. All right, Sal, let's talk one of my favorite receivers in the game. You've got a great bunch of stats here on Chris Godwin. And man, talk about something that makes me feel alive, like truly happy to be on planet Earth. Seeing Chris Godwin's performance in the first 2 weeks has been that for me.
Yeah, we've gotten what we were promised, more slot usage out of Chris Godwin. According to Dwayne McFarland of Fantasy Life, 65% of his snaps this year through 2 games out of the slot. That's more than double last year, by the way. So we've gotten the increase there, and it's translated. Week 1 catches all 4 of his slot targets for 48 yards and a touchdown. This past week catches 6 of 7 of his slot targets, 116 yards and a touchdown. So everything we wanted we're getting out of Chris Godwin. He's currently PFF's number 1 graded wide receiver through 2 weeks amongst all players, not just out of the slot. Things are looking good. And another note as I was looking at this, just to keep in mind, is it's just 2 weeks and it's against good wide receivers so far. But the Lions out of the slot, week 1, they allowed 16 receptions, the most in the NFL. Week 2, they allowed 116 receiving yards to Chris Godwin. Second most in the NFL, should have been the most. Justin Jefferson's 90-plus yard touchdown came out of the slot, so that's factored in there. Maybe that's something we talk about moving forward. In week 3, I'm just going to let you know, your guy Greg Dortch is on the docket out of the slot against this Lions slot. So I don't know if he pops off, we might have something here.
That is 100% right. My guy, Greg Dortch. Yeah, I'm going to go down as the internet's biggest Greg Dortch hater, which makes me sad because I have no reason to dislike Greg Dortch at all. But yeah, I'm glad that you said that because when I was looking at their schedule, I'm like, I almost said, week 3, the Cardinals don't really have a slot receiver. They do have a slot receiver in Greg Dortch, but I'm talking like a high volume guy. Because I don't think Greg Dortch needs to be a high volume guy in this offense.
Trey McBride.
But yeah, no, see, that's kind of where I was going to go with it was Trey McBride could have a big game. Week 4, we talked about JSN in the first half of the show. The Seahawks hit the Lions in week 4. Then they go on a week 5 bye. They come back and face Dallas. They got a pretty good receiver that lines up in the slot there in CeeDee Lamb. You're right. Some of these matchup things can be who's your opponent. And obviously they played Cooper Kupp, who was the only healthy pass catcher for the Rams in week 1. And then they get Chris Godwin, who's on a firestorm here. So it could be some of that. But regardless, to bring it back to Godwin, part of me thinks like, yes, this move to the slot is great. I think Chris Godwin is a matchup advantage in the slot, whereas outside he can play outside. He's a good player outside, but he just becomes a mismatch here for these guys in the slot. Part of me also thinks like, yeah, he kind of had a good season last year, Sal. He certainly looks more explosive this year. I'll give everybody that. But also like he's catching touchdowns, whereas last year he caught over 80 passes, over 1,000 yards. He just didn't catch any touchdowns. He might end up having the same catch yardage season as he did last year. He's just getting in the end zone this year.
Yeah, already matched his touchdown total from last season, so that's great. And yeah, I think part of this is all like just the overall environment on offense looks good right now. Like it wasn't just a fluke, it seems like, in week 1. So that's going to help. Like you get the slot usage, and that's something that should be a mismatch problem like you're talking about. But the overall offense just looks better. Like it's not like we're going 3 and out here. We're actually having sustainable drives. So we're getting those red zone targets for Chris Godwin. Some explosive plays just help even more. And this upcoming week in week 3, he gets the Denver Broncos. He'll get to most likely avoid Patrick Surtain by going into the slot for 2/3 of the game.
Good call.
So another nice spot for Godwin. If you're talking about like prop markets, maybe a spot to favor him over Mike Evans.
Love that. I've been betting the over on Chris Godwin's yardage each of the last 2 weeks. Probably going to do it again here in week 3. I have him as a top 20 receiver rest of season. He's somebody like I mentioned. I would rather have him than Jalen Waddle. I'd rather have him than DJ Moore. I'd rather have him than Steph Diggs at this point. These kind of secondary pass. Well, DJ Moore's the one in Chicago, but what a mess over there. But in terms of like the number 2 receivers, he's climbing up the ranks. For me, he's definitely somebody I think could have wide receiver 1 weeks every single week. And I do think even when the touchdowns go away, I think the yardage and catch floor will be pretty high for him as well.
Yeah, I think that he's somebody top 20 makes a ton of sense, and I just want him on my team every single week. We talked about Jameson Williams. He's obviously Godwin, just to set it, forget it. Wide receiver 2, maybe even starts to become a wide receiver 1 in your lineups.
All right, let's move on to your next set of stats here, which has to do with James Cook and the Bills' run game.
Yeah, James Cook and the Bills' run game. We saw them all the way back on Thursday Night Football. The dude scored 3 touchdowns, so obviously he's a good player. Week 1, he had over 100 total yards. But really, since this change of Joe Brady on November 14th last year, it's just kind of been the James Cook show. The offense has completely changed. Last year, they were run heavy. It's kind of looking like that this year. They have a solid offensive line, a better defense, which helps you get into some run-favorable scripts as well. And Cook has averaged 19.5 touches and 16.5 fantasy points when you factor in the postseason, couple of 2 games as well, since Joe Brady took over as the offensive coordinator. And that's top 10 running back usage. That's top 10 running back production. And I know the big thing is he going to score the touchdowns? Probably not. Josh Allen's there. Probably not going to score the touchdowns. But at this point, it doesn't matter if you're seeing nearly 20 opportunities per game behind a solid offensive line and a team that wants to run the ball. I'm all in right now on James Cook. And if you got a little bit worried, you saw the Thursday Night Football final stats. Why is he only playing or seeing 44% of the running back carries? Those final 2 drives, Ray Davis saw 6 of his 9 carries in blowout run. There's really nothing to that. James Cook is this team's clear RB1.
Man, the Bills' run game is awesome. You know, we talked about it with Nate Tice before the season. It really showed itself in week 1, and it definitely showed itself in a big way here in week 2. James Cook, it's so fascinating because the way they've designed this run game is, and it's odd. Like I'll tell you what, I definitely did not see this coming when Joe Brady took over. That they're gonna start to build this offense more around James Cook and the run game, because when you look at James Cook, Sal, he's not like he doesn't profile as a typical feature back, right? He's not a big back. He doesn't break a ton of tackles. He's not one of those type of guys. But what they've done here is they've leaned into, as we've talked about on the show, like these man gap run concepts, a lot of duo, a lot of just, power runs. And they're blowing open these massive holes for him. In terms of running backs who have 20 plus carries this year, James Cook is 3rd in yards before contact per attempt. The only 2 guys that are ahead of him is J.K. Dobbins, who we know has run through some massive holes, and then Jonathan Taylor as well. But let's play Jonathan Taylor all 4 quarters and see what happens there in Indianapolis. That would be nice. But yeah, I mean, it's perfectly designed for a back like James Cook, where they can just blow these massive lanes open, and he hits it with speed, hits it with authority. I love that. I think Cook is probably, I think he's probably a top 10 back right now for me at this point in fantasy.
Yeah, he's an RB1. Like if we extend it out to top 12, he's a top 12 back for me for sure. Moving forward, depends on the weeks, especially during bye weeks. He's a guy, just success rate is there right now. He's been extremely efficient. Getting a ton of carries under center, which has been nice for him as well, just to find those lanes and get a full head of steam for a very talented and quick back. So yeah, I'm in on James Cook right now. We saw it in week 1. We definitely saw it, like you said, in week 2. And I think this is just going to be the Bills' plan: defense and just run the damn ball.
Yeah, and that extends to the pass catchers, man. I don't think it's going to – Josh Allen obviously had a down week in fantasy last week. I don't think that's going to be the case every week because he can get a part of the run game too. Just the touchdowns went to James Cook. That's not going to be very often. I think he's still the QB1 overall in fantasy, but this does extend to the pass catchers. So I said this on the Panic Meter show with Dalton yesterday, Sal, that like if you thought Dalton Kincaid is going to be top 5 fantasy tight end, I think it's already time to throw the towel in on that take. Because mostly of the structure of the offense. Like if they're not going to be the Bills of old, he's going to need to have a dominant target share to get that type of tight end scoring. And I just don't think that's going to happen because these other guys are too damn useful. Shakir's too damn useful. Samuel will eventually play more. Coleman is out there. He didn't get a ton of targets week 2, but he's a useful player. You know, Matt Collins has been useful for them. So I don't know, man. Are you with me on this? I think it's time to already take the L on Dalton Kincaid, top 5 tight end this year.
Yeah, I would say I want to see 1 or 2 more weeks out of it, but other, like, I'm not completely gone, mostly because all the other tight ends aren't doing anything. Like when Travis Kelce and Sam Laporta are getting 3 points, like I was very big on Dalton Kincaid round 5 this year. So when people come to me and say it's not working out, I'll be like, well, whoever you would have taken there, it's not working out. Evan Ingram's now hurt. Kittle did have the nice game without Debo moving forward, could be a strong play. But for the most part, that range of tight ends isn't doing a whole lot right now. So I guess we'll see over the next week or 2 what happens for all those guys, including Kincaid.
There is somebody at the tight end position that is off to a hell of a start this year, and that is the next player you want to highlight in the data dump.
Yeah, it's the rookie, the first-round pick, Brock Bowers, and it seems like a lot of people, including myself, just overthought this one. A guy who for 3 years was the best tight end in college football at Georgia, was just so dominant, like nobody was even close to him. Yards after the catch monster, understood and was able to read all types of defenses at an elite NFL level as a college player. Yeah, it makes sense that he enters the NFL and he's pretty good, especially when Davante Adams is taking up a lot of a defense's attention. Right now, he's the number 1 tight end, which again, it's not all that hard because all the other elite tight ends struggling, but the number 1 tight end in fantasy, 17 targets through a couple of games. He has a 25% target share on this team that has Davante Adams. That has, I would say, an underrated receiver in Jacoby Myers, and he's still earning that many targets. And I don't think it's going to change. Like, I don't think this is just like, it's a 2-week thing. He's a rookie. It's tough for rookie tight ends. Go and trade him right now. No, the opposite. I think he's like the number 1 buy high if you need to in all of fantasy. Because I don't know how they're stopping this. This is not Davante Adams lines up on the outside, put Patrick Surtain on him or have a safety over top. This is Brock Bowers is all over the formation. He'll probably start to go into the backfield a little bit as well. I just don't know how you stop that, especially when Davante Adams is still out there as the number 1 priority. So I think it's a hot start for Brock Bowers, and I wouldn't be shocked if he finishes the end of the season right around this number 1 overall tight end or top 3, because I think he's that good, and I think the role's great.
I love that take about him being the best buy high in fantasy. So first read target shares, according to Fantasy Points data among tight ends. Number 1 is Trey McBride, 27.8%. Number 2 is Brock Bowers, 26.7%. I mean, I'm with you. I've always been a big Jacoby Myers fan. I think he's a really, really rock solid receiver, but he's down there at like 11% now because again, Jacoby Myers is good, but just think about what we saw with Gardner Minshew last year in Indianapolis. A lot of quick throws, RPOs, these option routes, and that's Brock Bowers, man. Like, yeah, obviously Davante Adams is a baller. He's still the top target on this team. That's not going anywhere. But just where Brock Bowers accumulates targets and where he's going to get looks on the field, it's actually not too dissimilar to Michael Pittman in Indianapolis last year. A guy that's going to be, he's not going to line up exclusively. Well, for one, Brock Bowers has run only 37.5% of his routes has been as an inline tight end, 50% as a slot receiver, 10.7% out wide. Michael Pittman's more of an outside receiver, but he can be used off the line of scrimmage in these tight condensed formations and running those quick hitting routes. Dude, that is Gardner Minshew bait. Okay, that is the way we think about Minshew is, like he throws these crazy passes down the field, and he does occasionally. He'll let it rip sometimes, which we've seen with Davante Adams, especially in the end of that Ravens game. But man, what he really loves to do is take those gimme throws and like just keep the offense on schedule. You talked about the EPA among tight ends, like that makes a ton of sense because he's keeping the offense moving. He's keeping the offense on schedule. So I love that take. Brock Bowers, I think great call in terms of buy high on him right now. I don't think there's maybe like 2 tight ends I'd rather have rest of season than Brock Bowers at this point. Maybe.
Yeah, and it's going to get better. He only ran 65% of the routes in week 2, saw 9 targets, had that great performance. He's only running about 70% of the routes. To keep that in perspective, like a lot of the elite tight ends are running 80 to 85% of the routes for you to feel really strong about their role. Yes, Michael Mayer's there. Yes, he's a really talented player as well, former second-round pick, one of the better tight ends out of college as well the last 5 years. So he's going to keep running routes, but Brock Bowers is going to get more usage. And if they keep using him as a slot receiver, it doesn't matter how many snaps Michael Mayer plays because, well, then he's kind of this de facto wide receiver. He's what we wanted Kyle Pitts to be, is what Brock Bowers is right now.
So true. So true. And by the way, not to go all back to the draft process and everything, but, I talked about this, I think it was with Derek Klassen on the show, that, when we think about what made Pitts this generational tight end prospect, it was because, oh, look how big he is. You could line him up at receiver. Well, great. And then he's a tight end being covered by cornerbacks. That's not efficient. But with Brock Bowers, he's such a unique body type that he can be used in all those ways that we just highlighted here. It's so great. Sal Vetri, do you know who the Raiders play in week 3?
Oh, off the top of my head, I do not.
It's the Carolina Panthers.
Oof.
Not a very
pretty good, huh? Pretty good.
Not a very good defense there in Carolina. So I feel like definitely, look, I've been hard on Minshew. I've been hard on the Raiders for their quarterback situation. I don't think it gives them a very high ceiling as an offense or as a team, but with this usage, with Gardner Minshew at quarterback, and definitely a matchup with the damn Panthers in week 3, the Broncos in week 5, who's, okay, Pat Surtain and old Devontae Adams going to go to work on the outside. Layup to Brock Bowers. So I do love this take about Bowers being the best buy high in fantasy football right now. So about another rookie who's getting pummeled with targets playing there for the New York Giants.
Yeah, Malik Neighbors right now, this is just absolutely insane. I mean, over a 60% target share, close to a 70% target share is the highest that I've seen. 18 targets on 28 pass attempts from Daniel Jones in this game. And look, the usage was also great. All over the field, he's being used left, right, out of the slot. He's being used intermediate, short, deep. He had 5 explosive plays. An explosive play, depending on where you're looking, determined as 20 plus yards. 5 in this game. Now, of course, when you get an 18 targets, it's easier to compile a lot more of those, but this is just the player that they thought they were getting. An explosive guy who can win at the top of routes and after the catch as well. He's dynamic. I think everything we're seeing out of Malik Neighbors is great so far. Like, I think he's a top 12 wide receiver in fantasy moving forward. Lock him in. I've seen enough. The problem is Daniel Jones. We knew that coming into the season. This offense, Daniel Jones, offensive line, all kind of scary. So you can kind of take this 2 ways. He needs 18 targets to have this type of big performance. What will he do when there's only those 9 or 10 target games? How much is Daniel Jones potentially going to be a liability moving forward? I really don't care about those things at this point because we just saw 18 targets and we've seen him be this dynamic and explosive. Just give me 10 targets and I'll be fine with that with Malik Neighbors, with any quarterback, honestly, moving forward. But right now I feel good about him, top 12 receiver moving forward.
Okay, I'm not quite there to top 12. I'm with you. Like, I think I have him wide receiver 16-ish type range. I'm totally there as him as an every week starter. Had him ranked as an every week starter at the beginning of the season. Totally with you on that. I will just say, let's see what happens when this passing offense goes against the defense that's not the Commanders. Obviously it was fine in week 1 for Malik Neighbors. He definitely needed more targets. He got more targets in week 2. I love that they didn't do the Mickey Mouse nonsense with Wan'Dale Robinson in week 2. That was great. Like, let's do more of that. I just want to see, Daniel Jones go against a defense that's going to heat him up, put him under pressure, and will he still make those throws to Malik Neighbors? They get the damn they get the damn Browns this week, and then the Cowboys and the Seahawks. So let's revisit where we feel. I'm not down on Neighbors. I think Neighbors is great. Should have had that 4th down catch, but overall great game, dynamic player. And I think that I don't think Daniel Jones is, like, let's be clear about this. When we think about these great prospects that have come into the league and, like, why aren't they producing a wide receiver like Drake London or Garrett Wilson? As bad as Daniel Jones is, he's not Zach Wilson. He's not Desmond Ridder or something like that. He's not good, but he's a couple tiers ahead of those guys. But overall, so he's good enough, I think, to get Malik Neighbors to functional production. That's why, despite Daniel Jones being Daniel Jones, I had Malik Neighbors as like wide receiver 20 entering this season. I just want to see what the usage for Neighbors looks like and the results for Jones looks like against teams like Cleveland, Dallas, Seattle, not necessarily fake stuff against the Commanders, which is the worst defense in the league, maybe.
Yeah, I think the matchups is a great point. So far through 2 weeks, the Giants' offensive line has looked much better than expected, but that will be tested, like you said, with the Browns and Cowboys pass rushes coming up. So if that offensive line can just be league average and hold up for those types of matchups, then I feel really confident coming out of that Week 4 game in Dallas after they play the Browns as well. So yeah, fingers crossed it keeps staying good. It's crazy, just a side note, that these offensive lines like the Giants, the Panthers, and even the Saints looked terrible at the beginning of the year. So far holding up. I think play callers have a lot to do with that, but yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I think Daboll's done a good job of trying to hide that offensive line play. And they have a great player in Andrew Thomas, so that helps a lot for sure. You got one guy in there that's not a complete disaster. It does tend to help the unit out. So yeah, I'm with you. Look, the ceiling and floor is pretty high for Malik Neighbors. I just let's put a pin in this and discuss it in a couple weeks in terms of whether I'm going to capitulate to Sal on the top 12 wide receiver. Sal's seen enough. I need to see just a little bit more so you can go with it on that. All right. You mentioned the Panthers. That's your final stat here that you want to talk. You want to talk about the Carolina Panthers. So go for it, Sal.
Yeah, 84 is the amount of passing yards on 26 attempts that Bryce Young had, 3.2 yards per attempt. But I just wanted to get into their 11 drives that they had in this game. 6 ended in a 3-and-out, 55% of those drives. 2 ended in turnover on downs, 1 interception, and only 1 drive went for more than 6 plays in that entire game. So when I first put this on my prep for this show, I said, okay, is it time for Andy Dalton soon? I literally have Andy Dalton ? Soon in my notes. And then literally a couple hours later, it's Andy Dalton time. So I thought about, okay, let's take this off. It's not really relevant anymore. But no, I think having this conversation is important because this offense has been terrible. And anybody who has a Panther, Deontay Johnson, maybe Jonathan Brooks on the IR, maybe you thought you would get something out of Adam Thielen. These guys have not been startable. They've been tanking your lineups. Literally, you can't get it done with 84 passing yards. But Andy Dalton's coming in, and this is actually an adult in the room now. This is a capable quarterback. This is a guy that if he gets time to throw, and the Panthers offensive line, especially in week 2, it looked good. They made some investments into the offensive line. They gave Bryce Young protection, which I think was maybe the nail in the coffin because it's not like he was under pressure nonstop. He had time to throw. If Andy Dalton has time to throw with guys like Deontay Johnson, what's left of Adam Thielen, I think that this offense could be fine. I think it can be fine in terms of getting Deontay Johnson into your flex spots for a week or two. So I think it's important to point out, Andy Dalton's here. What do you think of that? Because I'm getting a little bit more excited compared to what we've had.
Definitely willing to hold out hope is the way I put it.
Yeah. Okay, we'll take that.
We will take that because let me tell you what, if it was Bryce Young out there, it's hopeless. That was not credible football. That's why they're benching the guy that they took number 1 overall just 2 seconds ago, basically, and they gave up all these assets for. It's pretty clear, that it's so over for Bryce Young. I honestly wonder if Bryce Young's even on the roster by the end of the season. Just could a desperate team like Miami want to give you a 3rd-round pick for Bryce Young and let Mike McDaniel do kind of another, a much larger, but a little bit of a rehabilitation project? I wouldn't even mind that for Bryce Young at this point because it's so toxic. But I don't know if you know this about me, but I grew up a Panthers fan. Okay. So I couldn't care less about the franchise now. Have no feelings for the Panthers in terms of emotional investment, but I still follow a lot of Panthers fans because I got started doing when I got started in the industry, I did some Panthers write-ups and stuff like that. So I mean, there were people literally maybe it's time to just bring Cam Newton home again.
Oh man,
that's how bad it had gotten for Bryce Young in Carolina. When you get to that point, when you're back to let's do round 3 of bring Cam Newton home.
Yeah, on your you're on your 3rd old fashioned. You're down there in Charlotte somewhere, and you're just watching highlights of MVP Cam Newton. Why not bring him back?
Yeah. Why not? I mean, I know he's doing a podcast and God knows what else, but let's bring him back. But Bryce Young, you mentioned the YPA 3.2, the worst run game in the league last year. The Bucks 3.4 yards per attempt would have been better than a Tampa Bay Buccaneers run. The worst run game in the league last year would have been more efficient than a Bryce Young pass. That is it's so beyond over. So yeah, if it was Young, there'd be no hope. So I'm willing to hold out hope. Couple stats on this from Scott Barrett of Fantasy Points. The last time Andy Dalton was a starting quarterback with the 2022 Saints, he ranked first in accurate pass percentage, third in depth adjusted completion percentage, and sixth in PFF pass grade. He also notes that, not to pile on Bryce Young, but he ranks bottom 3 in all 3 stats since then. That's it. That is what it is. So that's obviously a couple years ago. Andy Dalton's an older player, but yeah, he's an adult in the room, man. I at the time with those Andy Dalton stats, I thought a lot of those were Chris Olave inflated stats because Chris Olave is always open. Deontay Johnson's always open. He's kind of the poor man's version of a Chris Olave, honestly. So yeah, I'm definitely willing to hold out hope for a guy like Deontay Johnson and some of these players, especially Jonathan Brooks. If you've been holding on to him on your IR spot and you're like, oh, dude, who cares? When he gets back, I'm never going to start him. Now, if this is a functional offense, maybe he ends up being a playable running back.
Yeah, Deontay Johnson, is this the best quarterback he's played with in 4 years? I think we're about to find out. I mean, he's a guy that I know. Yeah, pretty crazy. He's a guy that I know can earn targets. I feel pretty confident about that. I mean, he's done it like the first 2 weeks. They've been terrible targets, not catchable targets. Yeah. But I feel like I'm a sicko. I am buying low on Deontay Johnson. I've sent a Deontay Johnson trade as of this morning. So I'll follow up on that if I can get it through.
I hope you do. You know, I am a longtime Deontay Johnson fan. My bold prediction for him this year was he would be a wide receiver 1 because of volume and Bryce Young getting better. One of those things.
Yeah, we forgot that.
Bryce Young That's
fine.
Yeah, I forgot about that. I forgot Bryce Young was going to get worse. Actually, well, as I say in the bold predictions show, you got to read the terms and conditions. Bold predictions do not count against your record. All right, bold predictions, if they're right, then they do. But if you're wrong, you're not allowed to give us crap for bold predictions, hot takes, any of that stuff. That doesn't count. But yeah, the point was Deontay Johnson was a nice draft value because he's a good player, hopefully playing with an ascending quarterback. Not an ascending quarterback, but maybe a veteran quarterback who can simply get him on track. I'm with you on that. I would love to buy low on Deontay Johnson right now. And I bet you could get it. Number one, I bet in some leagues he's going to get outright dropped. And number two, I think you can probably get him as like a little throw-in at this point in trades. Like, we're making this deal. Just throw me Deontay Johnson. Like, who cares? And then we can get it done.
Exactly.
So,
Did you see those 84 passing yards? I mean, let me take him off your hands. Get somebody on the waivers. It's just as simple as that.
Simple as that. All right, we're going to take one final break. When we come back, Sal's going to give you 3 moves to make. After you're done being a sick freak and you buy Deontay Johnson, then you're going to make these 3 moves as well right after this. All right, we're back. Sal, 3 moves to make. Starting off number 1, it's time to sell this running back who has been flying high.
Yeah, I think it's time to sell J.K. Dobbins, and that might sound crazy to some people. You picked him up off the waivers. You think he's your league-winning running back, and he very well could be because he was free on the waivers for most people. He leads the NFL 266 rushing yards, 130 rushing yards in back-to-back games. In terms of rushing EPA, he's number 1. He's top 10 in success rate. I can't say a bad thing about J.K. Dobbins right now. I'm not going to say sell him because he's still technically splitting the backfield with Gus Edwards. I don't think that's going to continue. Gus Edwards has not been efficient. J.K. Dobbins has been highly efficient. But I will say he's coming off of a couple of nice matchups, and he's just a red-hot asset on your team right now. Like, can you send a trade out there? J.K. Dobbins for Chris Olave? I want to be doing that. Can you send a trade?
I love that.
Yeah, can you send a trade? J.K. Dobbins, maybe even same position trade we're talking about for Kyren Williams, and then you get your throw in a Deontay Johnson. Just see what the value is on J.K. Dobbins right now, because these are guys that I would rather be having. The matchups do get tougher moving forward as soon as this week against the Steelers. Don't be shocked if you see a 13 carry game, 50 yards and no touchdown for J.K. Dobbins this week. And there's no chance you're getting Chris Olave. So at least try and send those trades out there. I know he's been great for you. You probably have emotional attachments to it, but just trying to kind of piece this together. How can you improve your team before he comes back to earth? Could still finish as a top 15 running back, but probably not the number 1 overall running back.
Yeah, totally fair. I think it just depends on where people value him right now. There's still plenty of backs, I'd rather have for sure. And, you know, I do need to see more. He's still splitting carries with Gus Edwards. Totally understand that. It just is tough. I know for me, it would be tough to part with him if, you know, because, man, he does seem like one of the right answers this year in a great ecosystem. But I totally understand. Like, yeah, would I rather have Chris Olave? Absolutely. If for whatever reason you are accidentally loaded at the running back position and J.K. Dobbins is one of these guys you got for free, and you need some wide receiver help, injuries, that's what I would do. I don't know if I would necessarily, because I don't know if you can get a guy that's like clearly going to be in my top 12 or whatever rest of season at the running back position. But if you need help at receiver and another team helps at running back, I do think you can probably get yourself some fair trades there. So I like that. You mentioned trading for Kyren Williams, buddy, and that's your second move here. This one makes me nervous, so you're gonna have to sell me on this one.
Yeah, it probably should make you nervous because like any player attached to the Rams that is just a starter has gone down with injury, hit the IR. Their entire offensive line seems like they're on IR. Cooper Kupp seems like he's heading to IR. Puka Nacua on IR. Like all this is pretty scary right now, especially that offensive line piece for Kyren Williams. But the role is just so good. And this is with the assumptions that everybody is just down on the Rams because of these injuries. Kyren Williams still seeing great usage, just really hasn't had that big performance. I think he had 15 fantasy points last week, just kind of like, above average for sure, but nothing that's going to make you say he's a do not trade on my team if you're trying to acquire him at this point. And if you look at the end of the game stats, I think he ended up playing like 79% of the snaps, 60% of the carries. Not as good as what it was in week 1, but the final 8 plays of the game were Blake Corum runs. All 8. Every single one of those final 8 plays was the 8 carries Blake Corum had in the game. He's still not really involved. Now, moving forward, when you don't have your top receivers, maybe the offense starts to change a little bit. You start to get Blake Corum involved more, just the running game a little bit more involved. So I would agree that the offensive line is a big issue here. But when somebody's seeing 90% of the snaps, only Breece Hall right now and Bijan Robinson have better roles in fantasy through 2 weeks in terms of opportunity share and snaps. I'm going to try and send this trade. I'm going to try and send a trade if people don't view him as a top 10 usage running back, which he is right now, and try and acquire him. Like I said, if you can get J.K. Dobbins for Kyren Williams, I'm doing that today.
Yeah, we put the Rams in the coping corner in the people's panic meter, which usually means like once you're in the coping corner, well, you're not done, but like we don't talk about you in the panic meter anymore. Because yeah, if Kyren Williams goes out there and gets 20 carries for 70 yards this week, and people are panicking about it, it's like, well, yeah, you should. You're not panicking anymore. You're coping.
Right.
That's what the coping corner is all about. It is worth noting they should at least get Alaric Jackson back from suspension at left tackle. That should help a little bit since his backup, Joe Noteboom, is on IR. But man, like I'm just looking at the Rams injured reserve list right now. Obviously, Steve Avila is there. Puka Nacua is there. Joe Noteboom, I just mentioned, is there. They have other players on the defensive side of the football too. Connor McDermott, another depth offensive lineman, is on IR. Jonah Jackson might go on IR. Cooper Kupp might go on IR. John Johnson on the defense, he might go on. Like, dude, they're gonna run out of IR spots at some point. They're not gonna be able to bring any of these guys back. So, I don't know if I'm with you on this one, Sal, but I respect your boldness on it.
Yeah, you basically have to believe, and like you said, they get some guys back. They got Rob Havenstein back last week. Kevin Dotson is still kind of coming back from injury. So some help on the offensive line at this point. But you're basically telling yourself a story like, I believe in Sean McVay to scheme up some stuff with Matt Stafford, who like is the most important part of this, that he's still healthy at least. Mm-hmm. And when you're looking at the rest of the pass catchers, like all these guys, Demarcus Robinson, Tyler Johnson, and then you see Kyren Williams there, okay, that's probably a guy you're going to start to scheme into some important plays, especially if and when you get to the red zone. So yeah, and you're going to get those offensive linemen back in a couple of weeks. I want to be getting Kyren Williams now because I don't think he's going to be much lower value than maybe right now.
Totally fair. The Rams have a week 6 bye, and my God, do they need that week 6 bye, because they get the 49ers and the Bears the next 2 weeks, 2 pretty aggressive fronts. They come back and they get the Raiders, tough front, and then the Vikings, which is a tough defense to play. They'll get them on Thursday night. So we'll see where the Rams are. But yeah, Kyren Williams is kind of the lone survivor at this point from the skill position standpoint, so he certainly should get a lot of work. I mentioned you're a bold man for wanting to buy Kyren Williams. You're also a bold man for pretty much doubling down on this player after last week's performance.
Yeah, we talked about Tank Dell last week. He only had 3 catches for 40 yards, and I said, can it get worse than this, right? Can it get possibly any worse? Well, he ended week 2 with negative receiving yards. So it's pretty crazy for me to come on here. Maybe it's crazy talking to this mic and say, yeah, you should still be buying the guy who didn't even get 0 receiving yards last week. But here's the deal. Like, if you're looking through 2 games, he's ran 86% of the routes on this team. Basically, all those starting wide receivers with Diggs, Collins, and Tank Dell, they're all right around 86 to 88%. So he's out there all the time right now in this offense. And I don't think by the end of the year, we're going to look back and say, yeah, Nico Collins is great. Definitely the number 1 receiver on this team. He has over 250 yards right now receiving. I don't think if they see that same usage, there's going to be a gap of the 250, scale it up compared to the 37 yards. I think you're going to have your Tank Dell weeks. And week 1, a 50-yard touchdown was there. Great play by a defensive back to break it up. In week 2, what we just saw on Sunday Night Football, there's probably like a 60, 70-yard touchdown on the field for Tank Dell that he just left out there. So there's a couple of near misses right now. As long as we know he's talented, that's the biggest thing. Is this guy talented because he has more competition with Steph Diggs there? okay, we saw last year he's talented, he could earn targets. Well, if he's going to keep running this many routes, eventually he's going to have his weeks. You probably spent a 5th or a 6th round pick on him. I guarantee people view him right now as like a 10th round pick if we drafted again today in your home leagues. And that's where you can start to sneak in here. Again, this is not a guy that I would actually go out and trade J.K. Dobbins for, but some of those other guys that have been popping off lately, maybe you can get a deal done and exchange them and try and sell high on them with somebody like Tank Dell.
Look, a couple things to think about here. Number one, I don't think that the Texans passing game it's been good, but I don't think it's fired quite on all cylinders yet. Some of that is because they played a really good defense in Chicago. That's true. In week 1, they just ran the piss out of the ball against the Colts. So they didn't really need to air it out. And matchup in Minnesota against Brian Flores is going to be a big test for everybody involved this week. So you might even get another week of a discount on Tank Dell, actually, if you want to keep pushing this thing. The other thing I will just say about Tank Dell and why he might end up being maybe not great to start the season, but maybe better later. Everybody always wants to yada injuries, right? And this is a guy coming back from a serious leg injury. And everybody in the offseason is like, oh, yo, Harmon, look at him. He's running routes on Instagram. It's all good. I remember Tony Pollard, like everybody yada-yadaing that injury in somewhat similar injury there, yada-yadaing that one. And then Tony Pollard's like, yeah, I didn't feel like myself until week 11. Could we see that with Tank Dell? Potentially. Could he just not be all the way back yet? I probably should dig into the charting on this and see where he's at. But maybe he ends up being a guy that in the first half of the year, he just isn't all the way there. He's not fully integrated. And then in the back half, things get better. I do think that is possible.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I like the point on bringing up the injury, because even if the timelines that you're looking at and you see some doctors saying that this is the timeline the guy will be healthy and all the signs of him sprinting out there, he's healthy. There's also a thing called phantom pain with injuries. And it's like a completely mental thing of you just not trusting that or just feeling like you still have pain. And then it kind of just gets a little bit worse because of that. And that could be something that he's dealing with. We have no idea. I have no idea as well. But those are things that even though physically you're not being limited, it actually still affects you when you're out there. And it does look like these first couple of weeks, like you said about the passing attack in general, is just not fully going yet, maybe somewhat due to matchups and game script, but also it looks like the Tank Dell versus CJ Stroud connection right now isn't fully going, but we know it's there. Like we saw it last year. We know it's there. He's still a young, talented player, and I am willing to keep buying low.
Yeah. Full participations in practice and, being out there on the field doesn't mean okay. Like every situation is different when it comes to injuries, and you can have rules and guidelines and things to go back on, but those are all, every human being is different. Every injury is different. So I just think like this was something that was on my radar with Tank Dell, and I kind of like started to ignore it more as you got to the season because he's out there and stuff like that. But this is why I was really into Nico Collins this year, why I clearly think he's the one, because he's not coming off of an injury. And like we'll see with Tank Dell. I think Tank Dell is really, really, really good. I just am wondering if he ends up being a more back half player. But overall, I'm with you, Sal. I do think Tank Dell is a good buy. And again, another player that people might rage drop because nobody likes that negative. No one likes that little negative that you got to look at from the receiving yard perspective. So, I think Tank Dell is, even if now's not the right, I'm not sure when the right moment will be when he will start to establish himself. At some point, though, I think it's going to happen for Tank Dell.
Yeah, and I will say just in general on trading for Dell and all these guys we're talking about, like a lot of people will be listening or watching this and say like, oh, there's no way my league mates are going to trade me that for that or that for that. And I get that. Again, as we addressed last week, you are the sickos here. Like your league mates and you are probably watching all of this content. You're digesting it. You know the value of these players truly. But 90+% of leagues, I watched Isaiah Likely get picked up off the waivers and traded after week 1 in a home league for Chris Olave. A lot of these leagues are week to week. What have you done for me lately? And that's where you can take advantage, because for some of you, maybe that's not your leagues, but for the large majority of fantasy players, I think it is.
Totally. And look, the strategy behind these moves is just as important as the actual moves, man. So like you putting the psychology into place here and like, hey, this is what's happening. You can take what he said about, what Sal just said about Tank Dell or Kyron Williams or J.K. Dobbins and apply that to other situations as well. Look, I know for me, Sal, I feel this way. We're not trying to like spoon feed you the answers, trying to, what's the old saying, you teach a man to fish, he feeds himself for a lifetime, the whole thing. That's what we're trying to do here on this show. And I think we did it today on the week 3 data dump, Sal. So appreciate you for doing this. What do you got working on the website that people can check out this week?
Yes, dropping tomorrow morning is going to be my trades column on Yahoo. Thursday will be the matchups at each position to be pointing out the best matchups specifically. And then Friday, just key findings throughout the week, some things that similar to this, some stats that we brought up, things that I think are pretty important to know before your week 3 matchup.
Boom. We love it. Appreciate you, Sal. This was electric. That is going to do it for us today. On Thursday, the Fantasy Film Room is back with Nate Tice. We're going to look into the best offense in the NFL, which is somehow, some way, the New Orleans Saints offense. Is this sustainable? Will we continue to see it fly high? That's what we're going to tell you on Thursday. We'll also have a Thursday night preview between the Jets and the Patriots. Until then, we're out.